Okay, so welcome back. We are now at session number 5, where our panelists will discuss EU member states' initiatives that intend to increase plasma collections in Europe. And I'm very happy to introduce all the panelists to you. This session this time is moderated by Matthew Hodgko. So Matthew Hodgko is very well known to this audience. So he's the president of the Marketing Research Bureau. And he certainly is what we can call a global expert of the plasma industry. So prior to joining the Marketing Research Bureau, Dr. Hodgko worked at Baxter Bioscience, that's now Takeda, in the exit of market intelligence. He covered all plasma-based products in the company's portfolio. So he has also worked as a research scientist investigating protein interactions at the University of California. And he has been a consultant. He has received his MS and PhD degrees in biochemistry at the University of California. So Matthew, he's joined by 4 panelists. First one, ladies first, Svenja Tatjana Barckhausen. She has been working for more than 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. She has a commercial background and a university degree in business administration and international business. She is certainly also considered as an expert in the market, and she has a very good knowledge about the plasma collection, plasma fractionation, and global plasma market. So during her career, she has several leading positions in various operations and companies such as Höchst, Sanofi, Biotest, and now at Grifols, where she is executive board member for the Haema AG, and also managing director for the Haema Plasma KFT in Hungary. She's joined by Dr. Klara Barroti Toth, who is the director of quality assurance at the Hungarian National Blood Service. She's responsible for international affairs and as such part of also of the EDQM expert group. She's also a member of several other EU competent authorities with the topic in transfusion and human blood products. She has been involved in several international quality EU-supported projects, such as donor management. So in Hungary, she's the direct contact with plasmapheresis centers, and she's responsible for quality system and improvement of labeled blood products. Also would like to welcome Dr. Thierry Marquet. Dr. Marquet wears many hats. He is not only the chairman currently of PPTA France, he's also vice president of the Rare Diseases Committee, the LEM, in France, but he is also senior director of patient access and innovation at Takeda France. But above all, Dr. Marquet is a doctor. He's a specialist in geriatrics and neurocondition. As a young doctor, he did a 2-year cooperation service in Vietnam. After this, he began a career as a public hospital practitioner in geriatric university hospital in Paris. He has entered the pharmaceutical industry in '97, where he had various positions in medical departments. And in 2016, he took over the management of market access and public government affairs for Shire, France, and Benelux, before being appointed Director of Patient Access of Innovation at Takeda. And last, but certainly not least, we have here Adrian Goretzki, who is the founder and president of the EDU Institute in Poland. So between 2010 and 2018, he has been the president of the Polish Patient Organization for Primary Immune Deficiencies, Immunoprotect. And between 2014 and 2016, he was a member of the board of the International Patient Organization for Primary Immune Deficiencies. So he's a very experienced patient advocate and has been awarded for that on several occasions. So most recently, he received the Eurordis Black Pearl Award. Adrian is a lawyer, advisor, and many more. So thank you. Welcome to the panel.
Okay, we're gonna start off with a short presentation on some data, and then we will discuss the plasma collection systems of these 4 very different countries, and hopefully you'll learn a lot about some differences and similarities across these countries. So first off, let's start with some data so we can talk about a common ground about the current situation in the European Union regarding plasma collections and then plasma protein usage, focusing on immunoglobulins for this presentation. The data is collected by Market and Research Bureau, the company that I work for, and it's copyrighted. But let's start with some data. Let's just frame the whole industry over a 25-year period. And these pie charts are drawn to scale. You can see the growth and also the growth within the different proteins that are commercialized. And I want to point out 2 things out of this chart. There's more we can discuss, but for this presentation too. First off is the dramatic growth, 7.5% annually for 25 years to the latest data we have, to nearly 30 billion in 2021. It's over 30 billion last year. This is a pretty sizable market for these proteins, meaning that there's a lot of patients that benefit from these globally. The second thing I want to point out is the growth of the blue, the immunoglobulins, IVIG and subcutaneous IG, going from under 1/4 of the total to now 60% of the market on our latest data. It's really been the driver, and that's why for most of this presentation we will focus on the needs and the usage of that compared to the supply of plasma in the European market. So let's drill down a little bit into the immunoglobulin market, looking for the last 10 years or so by region. Most of the lines here are up and to the right, meaning growth, but at different levels. And North America is the biggest, as you can see, and really driving it. And because of the scaling to fit the North American on the other ones, it doesn't even look like the rest of the world is growing that much, but it is. It's just hard to see on this scale. But on percentage terms, it's growing as well. But all the regions are growing, including Europe. You'll see in 2020 and 2021, it kind of flattened out. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And why there was just not more usage of those products during the peak pandemic period. So let's look at Europe now. Prior to the coronavirus pandemic, the European consumption was growing at a very consistent 7% per year from over a 10-year period. These were driven by trends that we've discussed in this conference already: more diagnosis, primary immune deficiencies, more neurological growth, driven by quite a few, but CIDP being one of the major ones, myasthenia gravis and others also contributing significantly to that growth in those. Secondary immunodeficiency growth due to greater use of immunosuppressants for various diseases, including oncology and others. And then increased reimbursement in many countries. And we probably won't discuss that much about this in this session, but that's helped a lot in Europe as well as around the world. So what's happened since then? So there was a nice growth, and then it started declining. We had a pretty significant decline from 2020 to 2021, and then just a very slight decline last year. Based on estimates, I don't actually have 2022 full year data, so I'm kind of deriving it from that. But that's kind of what we saw is a peak. There's many reasons why this may be, but I would suppose that if you don't have a product, then it can't be used. And certainly there was not enough product in 2020 and 2021. So if you can't produce it because you don't have the supply of the raw material, you can't distribute it and patients can't use it. And I've met many patients in Europe this year and in last year talking about the challenges that they went through trying to get these products. So I would suppose that the rationale, the principal reason for this decline was not, in fact, less need of these immunoglobulin products in Europe, but rather less supply. Let's turn now to look at that supply. Let's start with a global look. This is the global plasma used for fractionation over the last 12 years, including 2022 estimates here, which I have a better sense of the market than the immunoglobulin usage from last year. And there's a pretty significant dip that we all know about from the coronavirus and the restrictions that caused lower donations in many countries, but especially the United States. But then look, we've seen this pickup. And if you look at the very end of that line, the global number, it's higher than it ever was before. So this industry should congratulate itself that 2022 was a record year of plasma collections globally, driven largely by a over 20% growth year on year in the United States. But also other regions also grew. And I will point out, if we look at recovered, and this came up in the last session, it's about 90% source, which is the gray line, and about 10% recovered, used for fractionation. It looks pretty flat. It's actually declined slightly over a 10-year period, but the last year or two saw a little bit of growth off of a little bit of lower base in 2020 with the pandemic. So both contribute a little bit, but certainly you can see from the chart the driving force behind the growth of supply of plasma is source plasma collections. So let's look at that regionally. That was the global look. And the regional one shows the imbalance that many, if not all of you know, that most of this plasma is collected in North America, and really it's 99% is United States. For reasons many of you know regarding the ability to have widespread private plasma collections with compensation. Europe, 15% of the total. It's the third biggest region, with China and Asia being the second largest one. If we just look at the numbers down below, as I mentioned before, 2022 was a record-breaking year for plasma collections, 3% higher than the pre-pandemic peak of 2019. So we are back into a growth mode, which will enable more patients globally to access these therapies. Now let's go just look at the European plasma collection side, focusing on the European Union here, not all of Europe as a continent, but the organization, European Union. So on the left, you see just the sources broken down by commercial or private, and non-commercial or public for both recovered plasma from whole blood and source plasma. And then on the right, you see line chart showing how those trends for those different four or three segments really have done, because commercial recovered or private recovered is a very small portion. Just a couple of trends. A decade ago and 2 decades and 3 decades ago, recovered plasma was the primary source of plasma for fractionation for this industry in the European Union. That's the red line, but you see that it is no higher. It's really oscillated, but it hasn't grown. In fact, it's lower today than it was in 2000. There's a lot of reasons for that. It has to do with patient blood management and the need of red cells by hospitals. But the point for this industry is that is not an area that is going to provide more plasma for patients for immunoglobulins. In contrast, private source plasma, source apheresis plasma has now become the number one contributor to the supply from Europe. And that comes from 4 countries, as many of you already know. So just 4 countries out of the 20 plus in the European Union are providing more than any other source. And then we should not negate or forget to mention that publicly collected source plasma has also grown from a pretty low base, and certainly it's smaller than those other 2 in the segments, but it is also growing. It also plays a role and a future role in providing more supply for this market. So let's look at a somewhat artificial but simple calculation that we can at least put in context, looking at how much plasma is collected within the European Union and compare that to how much immunoglobulin is needed by the patients as determined by the sales of those. So this is maybe not the true patient need. because there has been reported shortages of immunoglobulins, especially within the pandemic. But at least, if we look at what the usage has been, has Europe at least collected on a European Union level as much as the patients have used. And the trend was definitely quite a bit negative in the 2010s. But recently it's improved. But if you remember about 5 slides ago, the usage in the European Union has declined. And as I mentioned at that point, a lot of that, I would argue, is due to patients not getting the full supply that they and their doctors say they should get for optimal health. And you can talk to patients in the room about those experiences. And that if there had been that full supply available, then the 2022 self-sufficiency within the European Union would be 65% and not 82%. So it has to make a pretty big difference to reduce the amount of immunoglobulin usage available to patients in the perceived self-sufficiency. I also want to just point out on the advice of one of the panelists that even though this is looking at the European Union overall, not all of the markets have free flow of the product. For example, in France, the plasma collected in France cannot be used for Spanish patients where I live. It's only used for French patients. So this is artificial in a sense, but it gives you a sense of where the amount is and where the usage is. So taking that and just looking at from a deficit perspective with certain yields assumed, which may or may not be accurate for the entire market. The deficit is somewhere around 20 up to 30% during the peak of the pandemic for this region. The amount needed to collect just to be supporting the patients that are using these products is about 2 million liters last year, but was more than that in 2020. So then if we just look at a couple of individual countries based on 2020 data, which is the last data that I have really robust IG usage data at this point. We don't have the resources to collect all the data every year. I have the 4 countries that have both private and public on the left, and then 4 other large countries, one of them not inside the EU, but in Europe in general, UK, on the right. And you see the plasma needed, which is defined as the amount of immunoglobulin used divided by the yield in blue, and the plasma collected in orange. And there is a consistent trend in that the 4 that have both private and public plasma collections have the orange bar, which is plasma collected, higher than the blue bar, the plasma needed in those markets. Although, as a panelist might point out, in 2022, the German numbers were almost even. And then in comparison, these 4 other countries that have only the public system, they are relying on plasma either from the left countries that have private and public collections, or they're relying on plasma from the United States to fill in the gap to make that usage equal to the amount of plasma on a global level. It should also be mentioned that the plasma collected privately is not just used within those countries or even within the region of Europe, but nonetheless contributes to this global concept of sufficiency and supply. So let me just finish before we start our panel discussion with some suggestions to improve the European plasma supply for fractionation. First, it will be evident from a look into the demographics, into the diseases from which immunoglobulins is used, and by other means, that there will be increased demand for immunoglobulins in the European Union going forward. There was a decline in the past 2 years that was probably not related to demand, as I mentioned, but really related to the availability of the product. You can't use what you don't have physically. So the European Union should plan for increasing need of these products and therefore increasing supply of the plasma needed to make these products. Otherwise, patients will go without. Secondly, the current plasma collections system in the European Union has been insufficient to meet that growing need of immunoglobulins over the past 10 plus years. It is 20 to 25% short of what's needed. And if Europe wants more security in its raw materials for its medicines, it needs to make a plan to bridge that gap. Third, whether it's private or public, as was mentioned in the last session, really the European Union needs to focus on plasmapheresis. That's because you really can collect a lot more plasma that way, and it's really the only way to grow the supply of plasma fractionation. So that needs to be the focus, and having more availability of that should be improved. And then the commercial plasmapheresis should not be excluded from this because it does lead, as I showed in the 4 countries with plasma collections and not, to higher donation levels. And then finally, this is a recommendation that was also given to the European Parliament, supporting best practices for member states within the European Union to encourage adoption and an improvement on those. So lastly, rather for the first time on the Market and Research Bureau website, which is down there on the bottom, we do have a document that has a lot of this data and even more data than this that's freely available on our website. The link is up at the top of this presentation, but you can go to our Market and Research Bureau website and click on the sample data, and you have a lot of figures just to understand, you know, to the best of our ability to collect the data, where the supply and the collections and the usage of the products on immunoglobulins and the deficits thereof in the European market. So we can all talk about from a point of data understanding. And so with that, I will finish. We can turn this off, and we will go to the panel discussion. Okay, so as mentioned before by Alexa, we have 4 esteemed members from 4 different countries in Europe, all with unique and differentiated plasma collection systems today. And I hope that we will discuss these, and the audience, you will get a better sense of some of the diversity that exists within Europe, and then maybe some suggestions on how those could improve. So we'll start with the first question with Klara, and you work for the Hungarian National Blood Service. So could you please describe a little bit about the history of plasma collections in Hungary, and how the system went from 20 years ago, just a public system, to a public and private mixed system today?
Yes, in Hungary it's a mixed system because our service, the Hungarian National Blood Transfusion Service, is a government-based system. But the plasma collection centers, all of them are private companies. Last year, 45 centers were registered by the Hungarian National Pharmaceutical Agency. So this is the situation. I try to control 7 or 9 companies, the owners of the private centers, plasmapheresis centers in Hungary.
Yes, great. And then, so what is the relation between the Hungarian National Blood Service and the private collections? Are you overseeing them? Are they operating differently under another legislation, or you know, what's the relationship there?
Yes, some words about the history, not too much, of course.
Sure.
In 2009 was the first plasmapheresis centers opened. And after this, opened 3 other centers, different places in countries. But it was very interesting because in that time, the regulation, the legislation was not so clear. But some years later, at the end of the 2015, the government published a new government decree about the cooperation of the blood service and the blood supply in Hungary. And this decree defined a lot of things about, for example, the cooperation with the plasmapheresis centers. For example, before the authorization procedure of the centers, we have to prepare a special quality agreement each of centers. So it's very important for us because this define the information change and the other a lot of things.
Great, great. Adrian, so you're from Poland, very familiar with the system there. Could you describe the blood, but especially plasma collection system in Poland as it differs from what's in Hungary?
Yes, indeed, it differs. The plasma collection system in Poland is purely run by the state. This is the main difference. And the plasma is being collected in the regional blood centers. There is a couple of them in Poland. And it's mostly taken from the recovered, it's recovered plasma from the whole blood. It changed slightly, this ratio changed slightly during the COVID pandemic because they invested in apheresis a bit to get plasma from those who had COVID. And even there was an idea to increase it more as we have a very tiny fractionation plant in Poland, it's privately run, and they stated in the middle of pandemic that they invented a miracle cure for COVID, so it was commented in the media. Of course, it was the hyperimmune immunoglobulins, and in the end, it didn't work, but there was a national discussion about apheresis, and maybe increasing the level of plasma collected by apheresis. But in the end, we are in the place almost just like before the pandemic, so the plasma is collected from the whole blood. The numbers are like about 250,000 liters of plasma per annum. The overwhelming majority of it is used for sale, and it's being obtained by pharmaceutical companies. There is one national tender to get this plasma. I mean, the majority of the plasma goes in a tender. This, which will be used to fractionation in the European Union, that can be used because it's not the first time donors plasma. It's sold in the one big tender, and there is also some kind of novum in this agreement. When you buy Polish plasma, you have to offer it to the Polish market. It's not toll manufacturing. It's just you need to offer it from a financial perspective. You can, give a price which is much more higher than the usual, but you need to offer it. But, well, there's the tricky thing that if you offer it and they accept, you need to deliver it. So it's when the time we were speaking in the moment that there were some significant raw material shortages, so it wasn't easy. But that's all. I mean, the latest development is just this, sort of toll manufacturing in Poland. But no, we have a purely state-run system with no compensations. But it's just in theory, as there was a great discussion in the previous panel. There is no monetary compensation, but there are other incentives which costs much, much more for the system, which means in Poland, blood and plasma donors have a right not only to 7 chocolate bars, and it's not a joke. I remember comments here from my friends from other countries, but this is unhealthy to offer 6 chocolate bars to Polish patients, but that's the reality. So besides 7 chocolate bars, there are 2 days off from work. So in fact, in theory, as we have apheresis in Poland, one can have an extra more than a month of paid leave covered by the employer. Of course, it doesn't work like this because apheresis is very rarely used in Polish blood centers, but in theory, it's possible to have an extra month of vacations covered by the employer because of donating plasma. But in fact, it's very rarely used. Mostly it's about blood donations, whole blood donations. But of course, if you donate whole blood, you can also have those 7 chocolate bars and 2 days off. So you can eat, 3.5 chocolate bar a day or something like this. Yes, but that's the system right now. There were plans to change it, but maybe I'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
The reality is we have a state-run system and 250,000 liters of plasma collected every year.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Very fascinating. Let's go to Svenja. in the last session, Germany was voted as the best plasma collection system, regulatory system in Europe. You are intimately familiar with that, with your role in Haema and Grifols. Could you please describe, what makes the German system unique to what we've heard before, and then and its benefits, and then touch a little bit on the Czech Republic as well, since I know you know that one.
Thank you for the question, Matthew. And before I dive in a little bit in the German system, because it was breathtaking actually to see the vote, which was very interesting. I also want to mention one thing, what is important about Hungary, not to forget that, and I may add that here. Because in Hungary, the system, we do perform blood donation in the plasma centers at least once a year, because you need to qualify with a blood donation.
Right.
And I think it's important that you know that we even market that. So we have posters sticking outside on the doors of the centers before the blood donation day is coming. And I think, because you ask about the relationship, I think that's a very special relationship. The personnel comes with their own T-shirts and with the entire equipment, with the balances, with the sets, so that the donors can qualify. Just mentioning that, I think it's important because it's also very unique. I was actually surprised that the voters were not so fond of Hungary when you were doing this online vote. But well, when we talk about Germany, what can I say? It's a very liberal system, and that I mean that very positive, because in Germany, as you can see, I'm representing Haema, where we do private blood collection. That's very much unique in the world, that we not only do private blood collection, but we can also compensate for the blood. And we are all in a symbiosis in Germany, not really crowding out each other, because we had that earlier today also mentioned. We can see it works perfectly fine. We have the not-for-profit, we have the Red Cross, we have Haema, we're a big private collector, we have blood banks doing plasmapheresis as well, we have hospitals, clinics, and we can see it works, that system works. What, though, is very special about Germany, what you do not find in the other European countries collecting plasmapheresis, is that we are not allowed to market the compensation. So despite the fact that we are liberal, that you can open a private blood collection, and despite the fact that we can compensate for the blood, and we can see that it is indeed a very, very interesting situation, that all our marketing is about altruism, being a hero. Come, you do something good, you do it for the greater good, you do it for the patient. I think this is something, and despite that, we could see that the voting was very much in front of Germany.
Yeah, very, very fascinating. Already 3 very different models. Let's go to our 4th panelist, Thierry. In France, you're PPTA France president and work with Takeda there. Could you please explain the French collection system with regards to plasma and the current situation there in France?
Merci, Matthew. Yes, for the French organization of the plasma collection, this is a fruit of a long and painful history. Okay. To be short, 2 bodies, okay? One for the collection, plasma and blood collection. Sometimes this is very important to have a differentiation between the 2, okay? But this is the same body. This body named EFS, Établissement Français du Sang, is a total public organization as an hospital institution on the head of Ministry of Health directly. And of course, for the fractionation, you have the national fractioner who is under the vigilance of the Ministry of Industry and Economy. So this is 2 different ministers, okay? So, and of course, this is a monopoly to fractionate the French plasma for the French citizen. However, in 2019, the French High Audit Court, la Cour des Comptes, already pointed some insufficiency, clearly, in the report, for the plasma, and especially on the investment of France in apheresis. And also a clear mention of our ethical, dogmatic vision on plasma or blood donation. It was clear in the report. Why invest on apheresis? Because only 20 or 30% of the plasma sourcing from apheresis by AFS. Only that. The rest is the whole blood. So, despite some positive initiative with the plasma plan of AFS during 21 and 22, the EFS itself assumed that only 30% of the French needs are covered.
30%. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Great. Let's talk some more questions about some of the unique peculiarities as we've had a brief introduction. This has already been mentioned, already once or twice, but I'd like to go a little deeper with you, Klara, and your perspective, your understanding. Hungary is the only country in Europe that requires this. You need to donate blood once per year before you can be a plasma donor. So therefore, every plasma donor is also donating whole blood, which is supporting the transfusion needs in your country. That's a very unique and different solution to maybe the question of crowding out or something else. Can you explain, your thoughts on, why did this develop like this? Because no other country in Europe does that. And is it a good idea? Is it successful? Any thoughts on this peculiarity in the Hungarian system?
Yes, I think the origin caused this. In that time when it was the first plasmapheresis center was opened, a lot of people were afraid of we haven't got enough donors later. Because since 1959, the whole blood donors are voluntary and paid donors, of course, and they give at present around €2 voucher after the whole blood donation. If we compare, for example, the donation rate, plasma donation rate, it's a little bit different, the compensation, because it's a brutto around €20. This is the maximized cost of it, because this government decree maximized the compensation rate. Always, each of years, compare the minimum salary hour and maximum 5 times can give the donors. We have a study to estimate the effect of the plasmapheresis and the whole blood donation, but it's not influenced the donation compliance of the whole blood donors. 6 years ago, more than 30,000 plasma donors monitorized, and more than half of the donors give more than twice whole blood, so it's very important. Some data about the quantity last year, we collected 82,000 liters plasma from the whole blood donation. And because our institute responsible for the blood product supply in the whole country, and the plasma belongs to this volume, each of years our service management and the Institute of Pharmaceutical defined the minimum collection volume of the plasma in the whole country. It's more than 500,000 liters. If we compare the Hungarian population under 10 million people, I think it's very good, in my opinion, the collection.
Yes, yeah, as the data showed you, definitely collecting much more than is needed, and that's used by countries like France that don't collect enough.
And today we are not afraid of the influence of the plasma collection pharesis centers because this government decree defined who wants to be regular plasma pharesis donors, give whole blood minimum once per year, once per 365 days.
Right.
And after this donation, we give the person, the donors, a document, and it will be shown at the blood plasma pharesis center.
Yeah, show that they
qualify. And control this.
Right, excellent.
Yeah.
Interesting. Adrian, you are a person with primary immune deficiency and uses immunoglobulin therapy. Can you talk about the situation of therapy access or immunoglobulin access in Poland and your own personal experience?
Well, yes, I'm a patient and I am on the subcutaneous immunoglobulin therapy. And I come from a country which has almost the lowest IG consumption per capita in the European Union. And I am not surprised seeing those charts that the self-sufficiency of Europe raised last 2 years, because in Poland also there was a great success of the government because we raised our self-sufficiency by lowering the dosage of immunoglobulins for many patients. So it was the situation like this because, well, again, lowest IG consumption in the EU, while the health ministers were telling some key physicians that we are using too much immunoglobulins, and perhaps we need to revise the guidelines. So this was done, and as a result, our self-sufficiency raised. So, but speaking frankly, when it comes to PIDs, the situation is stable in Poland. There were some shortages last year, but it was rather quickly fixed, but it's just about PIDs. When it comes to other diseases treated by plasma-derived medicines, mostly immunoglobulins, the situation is worse, especially in the area of CIDP, neurology. This is where the patients are, or they are not offered with immunoglobulin therapy because there is no enough product. I live in the very populated country, and the potential is not used for sure. There was an idea 4 years ago about the fractionation plant. The government started thinking about the fractionation plant. Back then also we, in my foundation, we did a report commissioned by PPTA. It's available online at the plasmainpoland.com website about plasma donations in Poland, comparing to Czech Republic, comparing to Hungary. That, of course, those countries had much better situation than we got in Poland. The government wanted to build a plant, but I remember the first press conference about it. It was like, we are collecting 200,000 liters per year, so we'll build a plant, we will be self-sufficient, lowest IG consumption in capita in Poland. We will be self-sufficient, and we will sell excess products to Hungary, to Czech Republic, to Ukraine, and to Romania. This was the plan, from 200,000 liters of plasma. I'm very glad that the PTA did put a lot of effort in convincing, to changing their mind that it's not possible to operate a plant. Everything is possible, but it's like very hard to operate a plant with 200,000 liters of plasma collected and then be self-sufficient, whatever it means, and sell the product to neighboring countries from this amount of plasma. So as a result, after 4 years of discussions, we are in the same place. They wanted to be 100% independent 4 years ago. And after those 4 years, today, we are still 100% dependent on plasma from other countries, despite being a country with 36 million people and a lot of potential, which is currently unused. So I personally believe that there needs to be a change, maybe some kind of compromise between being self-sufficient and opening the market and raising the amount of plasma collected. But at the moment, they perhaps realize that they need much more plasma, but we are waiting for the next steps, perhaps after the election, which would be in autumn this year. So I'm glad that PPTA put this effort, that they realize that this is not an easy task, but there is no change for today, for now.
Great, thank you. Svenja, back to Germany, and you described the combination and the the coexistence of these different systems, and it was rated best in Europe by the audience, but I'm sure there are challenges. I'm sure there are areas that you find difficult to run Haema in your country, and what are the issues that you do face in trying to collect even more plasma, because the German need has been rising, and so to collect more plasma would be take greater efforts, and what challenges are you facing in Germany?
Well, the challenge is that they're always imminent, is the donors, they're not standing in line in front of the centers no matter what, so the compensation is not something where you can say it makes it natural that everyone is seeking to donate. And then, of course, to run a center is also not a no-brainer. You need specific personnel. You need personnel with medicinal background. You need reliable personnel. And when you have a low unemployment rate, what we do have in Germany, that's a big bottleneck. And also, of course, we have to watch that we don't overdo it in the centers. We cannot run a center with 50 FTEs and then say, okay, if 5 call in sick, then we still have the center open. So you have to be moderate also how you set up a center, and you cannot go overboard with the number of personnel that is in the center. Of course, we do want to make sure that the donor gets a service that is necessary and that makes the donor feel really sound and safe while he's donating. But then again, we do have to look at how to recruit the personnel. And then let's say the market, for example, the physicians that we have, recruiting physicians for the centers, that's really a challenge. It is. I mean, the physicians, they come from the health system, and actually, yes, in the health system, they need physicians. So we are pulling something from the health system just to provide a service for the donors. I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that this is, of course, a bottleneck. And then what I was also pointing out earlier today was the marketing, what is really a challenge.
Yeah. And
but then maybe one more remark, if you allow me.
Sure.
What I think is also challenging, because we've been talking here a lot about the self-sufficiency, and what I loved very much what was Johan from the IPPC saying earlier, the global sufficiency. I think that's really a good word how to describe it, because as Germany is such a liberal and open market, everyone can also procure in the German market. So even if LFB, if the French would say we would like to procure plasma in Germany, they can well do it. But a German fractionator cannot procure in France. So I think it's worthwhile to mention here that when we talk about plasma, we have to talk about what does the common market for plasma mean. We do have a common market for the finished products, but we still don't have it for the plasma. And I think it's the wrong viewpoint just to look at the single markets and at the different models if you don't talk about how do we get this a common market to get independent and increase a European sufficiency or even a global. But the European sufficiency only goes in line with working on the idea of having a common market for the plasma flow. Great.
Let me ask you about Czech Republic. That wasn't rated the best system by the audience. How is it different from the German one? And is it have the same challenges that you see in Germany, generally speaking, or are there specific challenges in the Czech private collection system?
Well, I would say that the Czech system, of course, you know that there's the blood collection is run by the public national blood service. So that is already a big system. Then talking about the plasmapheresis collection, Of course, the plasmapheresis collection is run by the private companies, and it's also a challenge to get the donors. They are in symbiosis in a way in the system, but I think in comparison to the German model, I would not really compare it, because every time you talk about a system where you have the public blood collection and the private plasma collection, they get along together. They have different models, whether it is a model like in Hungary, what I think it's unique, or the model in the Czech Republic where you do work together, but you know from the press and from the previous years that there has been always this question, is there really crowding out or not? Are we bothering each other or not? So this pops up. I think that's how Hungary solved that question actually brilliantly, and being role model here on that side. So it does work. But I think looking at the perfect systems, every country has to decide by itself. But I would always say, at the end of the line, the patient is the one who decides what model brings them the most product.
Right, right. Great segue, because Thierry, you're a physician used to taking care of patients. Could you give a bit more about your thoughts on the French system, and where you might see some room for improvement or not in regards to the plasma supply?
Yes, as a physician, for me, the concern around the compensation and ethical aspect, of course, I have only one consideration as a physician. The ethic is to serve the patient, okay? And for sure, this is a continuum of ethical action during the value chain of the plasma, from the donation to the patient. But clearly, this is the main for a physician. This is the main ethical aspect. For this ethical aspect, I would like to give you an example. For instance, for the kidney life donors, for when somebody gives the kidney for a family, okay? There is by law in France a compensation for the donors. So it exists, okay? And I explained that to the authorities, and this is absolutely commonly, ethically accepted, okay? And no problem with that. And for sure, for the blood or for the plasma donation, there is also a small one, compensation, €7, okay, by EFF, but nobody requested. Nobody. Yes, we can assume that recently there is a high-level mission mandated by the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Industry. It was from Inspection Générale d'Action Sociale and Finance General Inspection, a very important body in France. And yes, we had 2 hearings, PPTA, to this mission, and we are waiting for the report because it was in May. For sure, they will formulate proposal for the future of this plasma value chain in France. However, as usual in France, the decision will be finally political, okay? Any decision will require massive investment, okay? Of course, in terms of apheresis, but you're right, in terms of healthcare professional aboard the donation centers, because we have a crucial problematic with the the physician, and the nurse. The turnover is very, very, very important, and this is an important concern in the public, especially in the public domain currently. I was during the COVID crisis I'm on the sanitary reserve as medical doctor, and I serve in one Parisian EFS center. It was really critical, okay, to have people, healthcare professionals above in our centers, okay. So clearly, the investment needs to be massive if we need to promote more donation and for sure plasma in France.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to Adrian here. We'll mix up the order. What would be your recommendations for change in Poland? What would you like to see if the current system isn't meeting the needs, as you stated earlier?
Well, there are two areas. I mean, the first is the plasma collection, and of course, I would like to see more plasma collected from apheresis. So I believe there is a need, as we all know, the most efficient system is when there is a compensation. Also, it's still more efficient when there is a compensation, if this is a public system. So I believe that changing the policy of those 3 days in chocolate bars is something that needs to be done, because as my fantastic compatriot Peter Jaworski said, it's unfair, because those 2-3 days are okay when you are working, but when you're unemployed or a student, you've just got the 7 chocolate bars. And it may be hard to find a chocolate-loving student, because from my personal experience, I can say that students prefer other snacks and beverages than chocolate. So the system is unfair. So changing it, no matter, I mean, from the perspective of patient, it doesn't matter what is the brand, the products, there must be a product, it must be safe, and patients should have a choice. But so first step is raising the collection of plasma, preferably by apheresis in Poland, no matter what the system will look like. And the second thing is the fractionation. And, well, of course, we all know that perhaps this, as has been said by Svenja, also Johan mentioned about this somehow at the previous panel, that creating this model of every country is self-sufficient and independent might be a dead end. But on the other hand, as a lawyer, as somebody in the business for 12 years, cooperating with various government officials and agencies, I'm trying to understand their interests, also political interests. So I believe in Poland we should think also about the compromise, something which will serve both patients and increase the ratio of product, the ratio of collected plasma, but also somehow serve politically, if you would like to have something, have a change, use somehow the potential of the country. So for example, a public-private partnership, maybe there was a plant in Poland, they will be happy that there is a plant, but it will be, for example, done by public-private partnership. I very like the idea of Egypt, how they did it. I mean, I think the discussion needs to be initiated after the election, which are in autumn. And of course, we need to show them every time those charts. You see that there is the most effective way to do it, but on the other hand, be ready to, go for a compromise with the government to somehow create a win-win situation in the end. I mean, from my perspective, something must be done, because, as I said, me personally, I'm covered with immunoglobulins, but there are many patients with secondary immune deficiencies, with CIDP, that waited for those last 4 years when we had this discussion, and they are waiting now for the product, and still in Poland we've got very low IG consumption. So I really hope for a change in the upcoming years, and we just need to change something in the system, increase plasma collection, and then talk about how to use it, if we can obtain a compromise. Nevertheless, we absolutely need more plasma collected in Poland. This is a huge country with an unused potential when it comes to donating plasma. So in the end, this is an unused potential for saving people's lives.
Thank you, thank you. And Klara, slightly different question for you. Is donor protection a priority? As I understand it, there's some efforts to create a cross-donation management system. Did you discuss, what they're doing in Hungary to address these questions?
Yes, it's a key point of our work, so it's very important. Since published on this government decree. Regularly we get the information, the epidemiological information from the different plasmapheresis centers. So it's very useful for us. We are able to follow up the story of the donors, of course. And as you know, in Hungary, in our service, we got only one donor register, so it's very important. We cover the whole countries. So we try to copy this system, a little bit different, of course. At present, now we implement a cross-donor register with the plasmapheresis centers, but it's only a pilot situation because the data protection regulation caused some problem for us. So I hope this year we are able to finalize the implementation in the whole countries, this cross register, but it's very useful for us because we are able to monitorize the donation numbers, the collected volumes, and so on, because it's a very good tool for the protection of the plasmapheresis donors, and it's very important for us because on the other hand we need these people because we try to improve the whole blood donation compliance of these donors, because the plasmapheresis donors a different generation, a younger generation. Mm-hmm. And we try to save them to give whole blood to cover the level blood product request from the hospitals. So it's very important that we can finalize with the companies. But our cooperation is very good. And it's very important for us because 5 years ago, only 4 donors give different places plasmapheresis centers. But for example, last year, 11 person. So it's very important, the training of the pheresis donors, that it's very important that give plasma regularly. But on the other hand, their health, so it's very important.
Right.
And its risk is high, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. Svenja, let me ask you about compensation and safety. Do you think compensation leads to a safety issue? Could you elaborate on the donor selection criteria in Germany and address some of those questions? That was one of the highest in the last session polled conceptions, challenges about the industry.
Yeah, that's thank you for that question. When you look at the question of the safety and does it compromised by the compensation, I mean, first, when you look at the questionnaire of the PI, there's not a questionnaire for donor compensated and non-compensated, and I think that already hints to the point that we do not make a difference. The Red Cross, when they ask the question, the third criteria, and they look which donor is eligible to donation, it's not based on the pocket, it's based really on the health. And we don't make any compromise there, and I think that's the most important. And I think we have seen, and we heard it also from Peter today, when he was saying, I mean, we do know altruism is something where with 25 euros, with 20 euros, that's not really something where you say you're getting paid. This is only a compensation. For first-time donors, it takes you an hour and a half. And even for a repeat donor, if you're really fast and you're out there in 50 minutes, but you have to get there, you have the day before, you have to stay healthy. I like very much, Tilman, you said that earlier today, it's like health counseling. So there's no partying the day before, there's no excessive whatever, you even stop talking and start smoking. I think that was really hilarious to hear that. So it is actually the other way around. So the donor is behaving more healthy and is more concerned about the health going to a donor center. And the compensation, I think that's just a little add-on, and it's just, in my viewpoint, it's just being fair. to give a little bit, and it's not really a big amount that we allow.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I've got a question or two left, but is there any questions from the audience? I want to give anyone a chance to ask questions. The 4 panelists, 4 experts on 4 different countries within the European Union here. So if anyone has any questions, please step up. Otherwise, Thierry, I mean, you discussed a little bit about some of the ethical challenges. You mentioned that there was an audit of the collection model recently by the IGAS, as I understand it. Just share again with the audience, what was that about, and is that going to lead to any changes or not, or why was that even necessary, maybe?
Yes, they enter deeply in the subject with a very open mindset questioning, because I have 2 hearings with the mission. So we will see the report. At the reverse, during the preparation of the meeting, you asked me a question around the self-sufficiency of France.
Right.
I think this is an utopia, okay? And the response came from the Ministry of Health directly, because they write to us, PPTA in France, to reaffirm that the self-French sufficiency is impossible, and how much our company are important on the French territory and the French market. So clearly, he proposed in this letter to change the vision, and especially the vision with a discrimination between the origin of the plasma, with or without compensation, So it was the first time that we received this kind of, because he wrote from the Prime Minister, under the hat of the government. So it was the first time. So maybe something is changing, okay? I stay prudent, but he wrote that, okay? And especially around some regulatory constraint, around the derogatory marketing authorization for the product, or around the tax equity between the actors. So this is pretty new. So we will see in the future, and just in the future, near finance bill healthcare law for 24, I stay prudent.
Great. Well, stay tuned, everyone, for that. Was there any questions? Okay, Peter over there, I see, and I think that's Dana over there too. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is for Dr. Thierry. I'd like to know a little bit more about the French system. In particular, my understanding is that LFB Plasma is owned by the French government, the LFB Group, and they operate 4 plasma collection centers in the United States. And I believe they also operate the Europlasma centers in, I think it's Austria and the Czech Republic. So I'm just curious about the French government's view on this issue and about what people have to say in France about this as well. Because of course in the United States they compensate donors, and I'm also curious where that plasma ends up. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I cannot answer under the LFB. Yes, this is an actor with French, of course, activities and international activities. It's possible for the LFB. We said all together, always in France, that France is a paradoxal country.
I think that answers the question there. Dana, there, go ahead.
MRB. I wanted to ask about the frequency of plasmapheresis donation because there is much discussion about how frequent you can donate plasma here in the EU, and Hungary has a model, Germany has some kind of model too, to allow some frequency. How did you get there, and what will be your recommendations for, the other countries to follow?
Good question. Svenja, you want to talk about how frequent the German is and how it got there?
Yeah, we have 60 donations per year, Hungary 45. How did we get there? I mean, we have data to back that up. And giving a recommendation, I mean, I'm not going to touch a political side because that's actually the core of the discussion. And but I think it's worthwhile to look at the data that we collected in the market. And I think it's very important to do so because there are, as you're saying, there are different models. It's from 20 times to 60 times, even 104 times in the United States. So I think now is the time to look at the data. What can we back up with data? Because it feels like a number out of the blue, talking about the 33 or whatever, the 20 or the 45 or the 60 up to 104, and still in the United States there are enough donors and safe and sound, healthy, still donating. I think now is the time, especially in the light of the SOHO regulation, that we look at the data and then we agree all together, or we leave it up to the member states. But then again, I think we really need to look commonly at the data, and we're willing to provide that. And I think the PPTA is moving forward to do so and give that the backup.
Klara, would you like to discuss in Hungary, 45, right? How did that number come about, if you know?
Yeah, 45 events, but maximum 34 liters can be collected by year. And the limitation of the volume is dependent on the weight of the donor, of course. It's between 650 and 750 milliliters without the anticoagulant solution. And of course, we define the frequency of the donation 2 days, and after the whole blood donation, 40 days can give plasma again. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that regenerate has.
Great. I think we'll finish 2 minutes early here. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions here, and I think Alexa will say the next. But thank you.
Thank you also from my side. Just a couple of announcements. So we have now a lunch break until 2 o'clock. It's in the exhibit hall. It's sponsored by Haemonetics. And also don't forget to turn in your passport programs at the registration desk. And there the deadline is 2 p.m. And the next session begins at 2. Thank you.